So, Natlan finished, and I have some complicated thoughts about it. I spent each quest sitting there trying to figure out what was bothering me. Friendship is magic is typically something that I love, and yet I couldn't find it in myself to get into the hype. Was it the extremely odd pacing that prevented me from getting to truly know and therefore be invested in the characters? Was it the fact that a majority of the characters felt like they came from a dating sim, all falling over themselves to get to the eye of the traveler? Or was it the fact that, when you really think about it, Mavuika's plans had a lot of flaws? Like, it could have gone really badly if things didn't go perfectly. And, well, I think that those were parts of the issue. I believe the deeper problem, the thing that made it feel like it wasn't actually Genshin Impact, is what I will call the TikTokification of the story. Especially the parts of the story that we've essentially already experienced. One of the things that really bothered me as I was running around Natlan was the fact that everything they threw at us as being uniquely Natlan was actually something we dealt with before. They introduced Rift Hounds as if they were some new, dangerous enemy, but we've been fighting them since patch 2, and they've been retroactively placed in Mondstadt. Issues with ley lines have been constant, and even the focal point of Raiden's second character quest. There, we see a bunch of ghosts from the past being thrown out because of the ley lines, and Ai tells us that
the sacred Sakura can absorb and purify the filth in the ley lines. After the Rift Hounds attacked, some of this filth leaked out through the cracks in the trunk and formed a physical entity. An entity formed with strong filth would be highly aggressive, but when purified, it presents in the form of a memory.
We also already dealt with the ley lines being contaminated in Sumeru. Forbidden knowledge infected Irminsul and the ley lines, which caused a disastrous effect on all of Sumeru. To deal with this, Greater Lord Vukodavala created the Akasha Terminal, essentially using the nation, gathering it together, to purge the infection before sacrificing herself to get rid of the last remaining trace of forbidden knowledge from the ley lines. In essence, she did an extreme version of what Mavuika attempted to do before the captain stepped in. On its own, this makes sense. Each nation would be struggling with the same foundational issues as all of Teyvat struggles to survive. We would hit similar notes as that helps create a theme. But the fact that it is stressed time and time again as something that is so much worse in Natlan doesn't feel right in comparison to how things are being presented in a far tamer way. Take, for instance, the battle against the Abyss in Natlan and compare it to the war we partook in Inazuma. The cutscenes themselves are staged a little differently. The camera focuses more on the strikes and weapons during the Civil War rather than the cool flips and moves that we as the pullable characters are doing. But that's just a matter of framing. The biggest difference that I'm going to focus on comes from the way that they presented the after effects of the war. While we are told that NPCs died in Natlan, it's completely possible for a player to just not notice this impact, especially because we are pushed this patch specifically to do things as quickly as possible to gain a reward. You don't have time to take in the environment as much as you might like to, and therefore you could possibly miss the people showing up and disappearing. Even when we have a whole patch focused on the impact, we barely see any change because there are limitations to what they can alter in a single quest line. In Inazuma, or specifically Watatsumi Island, we feel the impact of the war through the constant need for supplies that is pressed upon them. By going to the nation mid-war, the game didn't need to alter anything to ensure that the player sees and feels the effect that it had on the nation. This makes things in Natlan feel a little bit cleaner, as if it had been censored in the same way that TikTokers or YouTubers try to do to avoid demonetization by presenting darker things in a more family-friendly way. But it's not just the censoring to polish away the darker themes that is TikTokifying the story. It's also the aforementioned pacing problem. Rather than giving us time to digest and learn more about the setting, the characters, and the plot, we're immediately thrown into things, fly through the problem, and then jump to the next. We get to the nation, immediately learn about what a pilgrimage is, get thrown into it, well knowing the characters for maybe 10 minutes, have a few quests of downtimes, and then immediately are thrown into saving a life, which takes us less than a day in-game. And that cycle continues throughout the entirety of Natlan. We're told about a concept, and within the next 2 quests have immediately solved it. The thing that is built up throughout the chapters, us joining Mavuika in the Night Kingdom to get rid of the abyssal corruption, consists of 4 small fights against a handful of enemies each time, and a boss fight that was placed on a linear path with numerous cutscenes in between. The emotional moment of the piece was meant to be when the traveler died. But they went over it so quickly that, to be frank, I didn't realize we had died until we were asking Mavuika about the Ode of Resurrection, and she told me it was my own strength that prevented me from dying. I'm assuming it was that black fog moment, but it happened so fast and moved on so quickly that I didn't even have time to try and guess what had happened. Rather than giving us, the player, a second to sit with our possible demise, they rushed through it as fast as possible. Hello, hi, yeah, editing Tirmel, just jumping in here to add a little bit more onto that because I felt like I didn't properly explore why I felt it was so important to experience that death, even though we had the Ode of Resurrection, so we knew that we weren't going to die. And also, we're the main character, they can't kill us, how else are we going to keep playing? But essentially, I thought it would be important because, the characters would then be able to experience this moment where they're faced with the idea that they're not infallible, like they're mortal. We have constantly overcome such hardships and faced such improbable odds, but always came up on the other side. So to have that moment of death, it would be traumatic. So I feel like they really missed that opportunity for the player and the character even to just have a moment to sit with, like, oh, I'm done, I messed up. So yeah, I will go back to proper storytelling now. Sorry for the weird noises you heard in the background. There's construction in my area. What fun for me. Yeah. And it's not as if Hoyoverse doesn't know how to sit with the protagonist quote-unquote dying for a moment. Star Rail does it amazingly. While the Trailblazer getting stabbed through the chest only lasts for a few seconds, they actually take the time to show it to the player. We hear them, and our companions, react to it. They choreograph the scene so that the player has a moment where they sit with the death, the failure to save Belobog, and then give them that same lance, imbue it with the power of preservation, and keep fighting. Every little detail, from the character animations to the amazing sound design, is meant to make you feel the moment's impact. But, Traveler, watch out! And then a moment of black before switching to Mavuika, who's walking up to us kneeling on the ground, it doesn't produce that same emotional resonance. They're so determined to present us with information as quickly as possible to get us to the next part that there's no time for that detailed, intricate storytelling. They're treating it as if they have less than 60 seconds to get all the information across. Hence, TikTokifying it. Oh, but Tirmel, if you didn't enjoy it, why are you playing? That's a valid question, and comes with 2 answers. The first, and the simplest, is that I've been playing since patch 1.2. At this point, I am getting to the end. They'd have to do something real stupid to make me just quit, okay? I've given them my time. At this point, I am getting the end answers. The second, and actually relevant answer, is that it's because I, perhaps foolishly, believe that these writing issues are about to go away. See, back in 2021, leakers such as, I'm gonna pronounce this wrong, Archiwisk? It's on the screen. It's this person. Yeah. Stated that the game's original 5-year plan had been altered to last 12 years. This, obviously, would impact any planning they were doing at the time. From the storyline preview trailer that was released a day before the game's official launch in September 2020, we know that they at least had some plans for what each nation would entail. We can also tell that there likely is a lot of changes done with Natlans. While we can speculate on what Dainsleif is saying about the Pyro Archon telling the Traveler a secret, and whether or not that happened, it's clear that Ison, the character's splash art that they show, was meant to be far more integral to the plot. After all, besides helping people by giving them the captain's medicine, we, as the player, don't do anything with her. The real quote-unquote poster child of the nation would either be Mualani or Kachina. There's also the fact that the Natlan we are shown in the Genshin Impact webtoon comes across as very different from what we know, which is kind of a surprise because we were not given a lot. They didn't have a lot to contradict, and yet the first scrap of information is given to us when Venti states, "This temper of yours, Miss Vanessa, is very Maratian." He then goes on to explain that it's a nation of strong and proud people who dwell on the volcanic slopes of the west, which includes the children of Marata, the Lady of Fire, who are a hardy people blessed with a head of fiery red hair. Yet not a single Natlan native, besides possibly Mavuika in certain aspects, can be seen as fitting this description. Speaking of Mavuika, well, it could potentially be a different Pyro-Archon at the time. Venti does describe them as being pretty obnoxious at times, which doesn't quite match up with the image that they're trying to present to us now. Yet, we cannot pass this information off as strictly non-canon. When Sumeru started, they made it very clear that the same timeline events that had happened in that story occurred to our version of Collie and the Gang. This could be seen as growing pains. As you write, the story will transform and events may need to be altered to match. However, there's also a smoking gun, which helps cement the fact that Natlan was likely altered to make space for the new 12-year plans. That smoking gun is Nord-Karai. The first time we heard about this location was back in November 2024, when Libin showed up to give us his yearly hint as to what the next location's gonna be. He mentions a guild that we, somehow, have never heard of prior to this point, and then gave us a warning that the people there are probably going to mug us. Then, we don't hear about this place again until Mavuika points us to it because they gained information off-screen about the place being supposedly connected to the Doctor, who we never mentioned to her, so I don't know why she knows that we desperately want to beat him up for what he did to Nahida. Oh, and let's not forget that
the people there can use a very special power. It's said that this mysterious power predates even the 7 elements of Teyvat.
And yet we have somehow never heard about that? Maybe I'd buy it if we didn't have such detailed lore everywhere else. But we do have such detailed lore everywhere else. There should have at least been a book in one of the nations mentioning this. Why is the people in Sumeru not interested in researching this when they want to research literally everything else? Or why isn't there any Fontanian people trying to do experiments? Because they kept showing up in every other nation to do experiments before. But if Natlan is the nation that got edited all to hell to allow the inclusion of the new parts, that would explain the pacing issue and the extreme differences. They'd likely have to remove key events or insert certain elements to allow for later story beats. Us getting an ancient name, for example. Since we don't really die, them giving us an ancient name didn't actually have an impact on the story. But it did mean we were recorded and are now a part of the ley lines. If their new story beat requires us to be integrated into Teyvat's system after they already showed that we weren't with the whole we can remember the Greater Lord thing, it would make sense that this story would be heavily focused on us being recorded and made a part of what is essentially the world's database. That would also, theoretically, mean that we're getting past these growing pains where they're forcing things in. We're going into new content with nothing needing to be forced. Things can go naturally and flow well. Or I could be an optimistic fool and the writing will only get worse. We'll just have to wait and see, but let me be helpful. And with that, I think I am done ranting about the TikTokification of Natlan. Thank you for taking your time to listen to me ramble once again. I don't have anything else to say. I'm gonna go disappear for another 2 years or something. Alright, bye!